Mara never meant to stumble into anything forbidden. It began as an irritation, the kind that doesn't announce itself loudly but keeps returning when the room goes quiet. She worked late, the city humming through the window, her phone dark, her hands resting uselessly on the desk. She had tried the usual things people try when they feel unmoored: music, breathing apps, whispered requests aimed upward, but everything sounded like asking permission from a door that never opened. What shifted was small enough to be dismissed. Her left hand, idle, slid across her chest while she leaned back, palms settling against her heart. It wasn't deliberate. She didn't light a candle or bow her head. She didn't even close her eyes. The movement felt older than intention, like scratching an itch you didn't know you had. Something in her posture changed. The room didn't glow or tremble, but the noise inside her thinned, as if someone had turned a dial a few degrees to the left. The familiar urge to ask, "Please, help, if it's allowed," fell silent. In its place rose a steadier sense, not of pleading, but of recognition. She wasn't reaching. She was acknowledging. She stayed like that longer than she meant to. The city sounds returned, but they didn't crowd her. When she finally moved, the calm lingered, faint but unmistakable, like warmth after a cup of tea. She laughed it off, told herself it was posture, pressure on a nerve, coincidence. Still, the next night, without thinking, she did it again. This time she noticed resistance. A flicker of embarrassment, almost superstitious, as if she were breaking an unspoken rule. Left hand. Heart. It felt backward. She had grown up hearing jokes, warnings even, about the wrong side, left-handed compliments, left turns leading astray. Yet the sensation returned more quickly now, the quiet spreading through her chest instead of hovering at the edges. She didn't pray. That was the strangest part. There were no words shaped like requests. The feeling was closer to saying a name you already know, a name that answers by being spoken, not by replying. When she finished, she sat there, unsettled by how complete it felt without having asked for anything at all. Curiosity took over where doubt had stalled. She searched late into the night, not for comfort but for context. Buried beneath commentary and arguments, she found fragments, old diagrams, marginal notes, scanned pages with uneven type. They spoke of the body as a circuit, of sides and crossings, of a gesture dismissed as harmless superstition but once treated as dangerous knowledge. The left side, according to these scraps, was not unlucky. It was direct. Unmediated. Where the right extended outward, tools, oaths, hierarchies, the left turned inward, crossing the chest to meet the heart. The gesture wasn't a plea sent up a chain of command. It was an assertion of contact. Mara read until her eyes burned. The language was unfamiliar but oddly precise. Words like recognition, alignment, return. No talk of punishment. No bargaining. Just a reminder, the source is not distant. Stop speaking to it as if it were. The next evening she tried again, deliberately now. She stood instead of sitting, feet planted, spine straight but relaxed. Left palm to heart. She breathed once, slow enough to feel the ribs expand. For a moment nothing happened, and a familiar impatience crept in. Then she remembered what she had read. This wasn't about making something occur. It was about noticing what already was. The resistance returned stronger this time. Thoughts lined up to interrupt her. This is silly. You're imagining it. Who do you think you are? Each one carried the same underlying message: step back, defer, ask properly or not at all. She recognized the pattern with a clarity that surprised her. These weren't new doubts. They were rehearsed. She didn't argue with them. She didn't push them away. She let them pass, like traffic noise outside a window. Beneath them, the quiet deepened. It wasn't blissful. It was grounded, heavy in a reassuring way, like standing on solid stone after walking on sand. For the first time, she understood why something so simple could be discouraged. There was no role to play here, no approval to seek. The experience didn't make her special, but it did make her responsible. If access was immediate, then dependency was optional. That idea alone felt subversive. She lowered her hand eventually, heart still steady, mind clearer than it had been in weeks. The world hadn't changed. Bills waited. Messages went unanswered. But something fundamental had shifted in how she oriented herself within it. She wasn't facing outward, hoping to be seen. She was standing in contact, already known. Later, lying in bed, she wondered how many others had stumbled on the same thing and been talked out of it. How many had felt this quiet authority and then been told it was improper, dangerous, or simply wrong. The thought didn't make her angry. It made her attentive. She placed her left hand on her chest once more before sleep, not as a ritual, not as a test, but as a reminder. No request formed in her mind. None was needed. The recognition was enough. Elias had learned to read between lines long before Mara met him. He worked in a narrow apartment crowded with books whose spines rarely matched, texts gathered from auctions, libraries discarding their dead weight, and private sellers who didn't ask many questions. His interest wasn't nostalgia. It was pattern. He wanted to know why certain ideas survived only as fragments, why some gestures vanished while entire empires collapsed and rebuilt themselves. When Mara described what she had felt, the left hand, the sudden quiet, he didn't interrupt her. He listened with the patience of someone hearing a melody he already knew. When she finished, expecting correction or skepticism, he only nodded. They always start with the body, he said finally. Because it's the fastest route. And the hardest to control once people remember it. He showed her manuscripts where margins were more revealing than the main text. Notes scratched out, then reinserted elsewhere with safer language. Commands softened into requests. Statements reframed as hopes. Over and over, the same maneuver appeared: remove authority from the speaker and relocate it somewhere unreachable. Language, Elias explained, was the first battlefield. A practice that begins with recognition, "This is so," becomes manageable once rewritten as supplication, "May this be allowed." The difference sounds polite. It isn't. One presumes contact, the other presumes distance. That he traced the stigma of the left side with careful precision. The word itself, he noted, had been bent into an insult. Left became suspect, then immoral, then forbidden. Not because of any inherent danger, but because of association. The left crossed the body. It bypassed external symbols. It didn't require witnesses. When a movement doesn't need permission, Elias said, institutions step in to provide it anyway. Mara saw it everywhere once he pointed it out. Gestures standardized. Postures regulated. Even silence curated. Anything that hinted at direct access was reframed as arrogance or delusion. Better to kneel than to stand. Better to ask than to know. What unsettled her most was how ordinary the strategy felt. No dramatic villainy. Just incremental edits, each one defensible on its own. Over time, the original practice didn't disappear, it became unthinkable. People stopped trying not because they were forbidden, but because they were embarrassed. Elias showed her records of councils and decrees, but he didn't linger on names or dates. Those changed. The pattern didn't. Each time a teaching threatened to collapse the distance between individual and source, a buffer was installed. A title. A ritual. A hierarchy. Something to stand between. This is why the body matters, he said. You can argue with doctrines. You can reinterpret texts. But a posture is harder to police once someone feels it work. Mara practiced in small moments now. On the train. Waiting in line. Standing at the sink. Left palm to heart, brief and unremarkable. The effect was subtle but cumulative. She noticed how quickly she defaulted to asking, "Should I? May I?" and how often that reflex dissolved when she returned to recognition instead. Still, resistance followed her. Friends joked when she mentioned posture and focus. Online comments dismissed similar practices as placebo or narcissism. Even alone, a voice rose up that sounded suspiciously like concern. Don't get carried away, stay reasonable, don't step outside what's accepted. Elias wasn't surprised. If it were loud opposition, he said, you'd know where you stand. This is quieter. It convinces you to stop yourself. He urged her to notice the emotional texture of that voice. Not fear, exactly. More like caution dressed as humility. A warning that confidence without endorsement was dangerous. What they fear, he added, isn't rebellion. It's independence. The more Mara practiced, the less dramatic it felt. There were no visions, no declarations. Just a steady sense of alignment, as if she were standing where she had always meant to stand. The practice didn't separate her from daily life. It integrated her more deeply into it. One evening, after a long conversation, Elias leaned back and closed his eyes. He placed his left hand on his chest without ceremony. This was never meant to be rare, he said softly. It was meant to be common enough to be boring. Mara understood then why boredom itself could be a threat. A practice that becomes ordinary doesn't inspire devotion to structures built around it. It doesn't require enforcement. It simply works, quietly, in the background. As she walked home, city lights flickering across wet pavement, she tried the gesture again. The noise receded, not into silence, but into proportion. The world felt present without being overwhelming. She thought of all the edits, all the soft discouragements layered over centuries, and felt neither anger nor triumph. Just clarity. The access hadn't been destroyed. It had been ignored, and ignoring, she realized, was something she could stop doing. Mara didn't wait for a perfect moment to try again. She had learned by now that waiting was one of the oldest delaying tactics, dressed up as patience. Instead, she chose an ordinary night. Dishes in the sink. Notifications unanswered. Nothing resolved. That felt important. If this practice only worked in ideal conditions, it wouldn't be worth much. She stood in the dim light of her living room, feet shoulder-width apart, weight evenly distributed. Left hand to heart. Not pressed, just resting. She noticed how instinctively her shoulders wanted to curl inward, how the body remembered submission even when the mind didn't ask for it anymore. She let them drop. Elias had described the sequence simply, almost dismissively, as if over-explaining would ruin it. Position first. Breath second. Declaration third. Then stop. No layering. No embellishment. Mara inhaled once, slow and unforced, feeling the air expand her chest under her palm. She exhaled without drama. Then, quietly, she spoke the words, not aloud, but clearly enough that there was no ambiguity inside her. They weren't poetic. They weren't long. They weren't framed as a wish, they were a statement. As soon as she finished, the urge to continue rushed in. To add something. To clarify. To ask for confirmation. She recognized that impulse instantly now. It was the same reflex she had seen everywhere: never let recognition stand alone. Always follow it with qualification. She didn't, she stayed still. No mantra. No visualization. Just presence. The stillness wasn't empty. It was dense, almost textured, like the air before rain. Thoughts rose and fell, but none demanded action. For the first time, she understood what silence actually meant: not the absence of sound, but the absence of negotiation. A wave of resistance followed, right on schedule. Doubt sharpened its edges. This isn't doing anything. You're just standing here. If it mattered, it would feel bigger. The arguments were familiar, but now they sounded tired, like lines read too many times. She let them pass. What replaced them wasn't euphoria. It was steadiness. A sense of being exactly where she was, without leaning forward or pulling back. The feeling didn't elevate her above anything. It anchored her. Minutes passed, or seconds, she couldn't tell. Eventually, she lowered her hand. The room looked the same. Her life remained unresolved. Yet something fundamental had shifted again, not dramatically, but decisively. The next challenge wasn't performing the practice. It was remembering to use it when it mattered. In conversations where she usually deferred. In moments where she felt the familiar tug to ask for permission, internally or out loud, to exist as she was. She noticed how often urgency tried to hijack her attention. Do it now or you'll miss it. Say more. Fix this. Each time, she returned to the same quiet recognition. Not avoidance. Not passivity. Just contact. Elias warned her that this was where most people stopped. Not because the practice failed, but because it succeeded without spectacle. There was nothing to post, nothing to prove. The mind, addicted to progress markers, grew restless. Silence doesn't reward you, he had said. It stabilizes you. And stability doesn't flatter the ego. Mara felt that truth when she skipped the practice one night and noticed how quickly the old patterns crept back in. The noise. The subtle anxiety. The urge to outsource certainty. Nothing catastrophic, just a gradual drift away from center. So she returned to it. Not obsessively. Not ritualistically. Just consistently. Sometimes standing. Sometimes sitting. Sometimes in the middle of a crowded street, hand barely touching her chest beneath a jacket. The gesture became less noticeable even to her, which felt like progress of the strangest kind. One evening, she realized she hadn't felt the need to ask for guidance in days. Decisions arose and resolved themselves without inner debate. When uncertainty appeared, it didn't spiral. It paused, then settled. She understood then what had truly been erased over time. Not a secret technique, not even specific words. What had been buried was the confidence to stop asking and start recognizing. This wasn't rebellion. It wasn't enlightenment. It was alignment, and alignment, once felt, was difficult to forget. If you've stayed with this story until now, it's probably because something in it felt familiar, even if you couldn't immediately explain why. That familiarity isn't coincidence. Practices like the one Mara discovered don't announce themselves with fireworks. They surface quietly, often disguised as something too simple to matter. The point of this story was never to convince you of a belief or to replace one system with another. It was to remind you of a posture, internal and external, that doesn't require permission to be effective. Recognition over request. Contact over distance. Stability over spectacle. You don't need to dramatize it. You don't need to announce it. Try it tonight, or don't. Notice what resists you either way. That resistance is often more informative than any sensation that follows. If this video helped you see something you hadn't named before, support the channel by subscribing so these explorations can continue. If it sparked a question or a disagreement, leave a like to let me know this kind of content is worth making. And if you know someone who's been circling the same inner questions, share this video with them. You never know which quiet reminder arrives at the right moment.